probably the most important regulation about this is in the 15th chapter of Deuteronomy. It's an extraordinary law called the year of release. And what it says is that you cannot have anybody owe you a debt for more than 6 years. At the end of 7 years, you got to cancel the debt. Because especially if you're dealing with poor people, you got to cancel the debt on poor people. Because we don't want a permanent economic underclass in a covenantal community. You have to do this because there will always be poor people who need it. And what we often don't notice is that in this same text, Moses says, if you do this, you can eradicate poverty by canceling debts so that the practice of the economy is subordinated to the well-being of the civil community. One other observation about this law that you would not notice in English translation. In Hebrew grammar in the Bible, there are no adverbs. So the way they make an adverb is that they repeat the verb. So if you want to say, really give, you say, give, give. It's called in Hebrew an absolute infinitive. The most amazing thing is that in this text from Deuteronomy chapter 15, there are 5 absolute infinitives. There are 5 intensified verbs, meaning you gotta do this. And I don't know any other text in the Old Testament that has 5 such intensified verbs, which makes it seem like the tradition thought that this was the most urgent economic practice of neighborliness that they could imagine, and the most dangerous. So those are the first set of texts about welcoming those who are weak and vulnerable and unlike us. They need guarantees of economic viability. The next text that I want to mention has to do with the religiously objectionable. This is a text in the 56th chapter of Isaiah, and it's quite an extraordinary text because when they came back from exile in the book of Isaiah, they had a discussion about who are we going to let in to our worshiping community. You know, every major denomination has now had these discussions about who are the real Presbyterians or who are the real Episcopalians, arguments about people of color, arguments about women, the gay and lesbian community. So there's always this argument about inclusion or exclusion. And they had the same argument. Let's exclude all the others. That's what the book of Leviticus tells us to do, so let's do it, exclude them. But in the 56th chapter of Isaiah, it says, do not let the eunuchs say, oh, they won't let me in. Well, eunuchs are people who signed on with the Babylonian Empire and agreed to become eunuchs so they could advance in the empire. Now they want to come back and be Jews. And this text says, let them back, welcome them. And then the parallel line is, do not let foreigners say, oh, they won't let me in. So they take the 2 most objectionable cases of eunuchs and foreigners, and it says they only have to do 2 things to have membership with us. They have to keep covenant. Well, yeah, they have to engage us. And they have to keep Sabbath. Now, Sabbath then, and I think now, is a regular discipline that says, my life does not consist in production and consumption. It's a regular pause of resistance that if I'm going to be a member of this covenant community, I'm not going to have my life defined by production and consumption. What's the answer to the question, who is qualified to get in? Churches set up all kinds of qualifications. Do you obey all of our laws? Do you pledge certain amounts of money? Do you act right? But this is the text that goes on to say, and this is the one that Jesus quotes, that my house shall become a house of prayer for all people. This is an incredible religious openness to those whose past history is quite unlike our own. So it is a very low bar for welcome. In just about every Christian denomination, there's a discussion about who can come for communion. Can the baptized come? Can the confirmed come? Who's eligible? There's a tradition in the United Church of Christ, learned from African Americans in the church, in which they call the communion table the welcome table. So the church has been arguing about Holy Communion since the beginning, about whether it's a welcome table or whether there are rules and regulations, because if you can't eat with us, then you really don't belong with us. Which reminds me of a line from Joseph Lowry, a Methodist of the MLK generation of freedom fighters. And he tells about the time when he was young, and he did a sit-in at a lunch counter as a person of color. And they made him wait and wait and wait. And finally the waitress came and said, in the painful language of that era, "I'm sorry, but we don't serve Negroes." And he said, "I didn't order a Negro, I ordered a chicken salad sandwich." And then the 58th chapter of Isaiah says, "I am the God who gathers, and I will gather others to those who are already gathered." That one verse uses the word gather 3 times. So this is a God who's bringing all the Jews home. That's what it means, homecoming to Jerusalem. But I'm also bringing everybody home. So in the UCC, the opening formula for the Lord's table is, come from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south. This is the glorious festival of the kingdom of God. Such a welcome. It's noteworthy that this text from Isaiah 56 is probably contemporary with texts from Ezekiel, which are very exclusionary around the same question. So you can see that argument was going on there. I've talked about the Deuteronomy text of embrace of the vulnerable. I've talked about Isaiah 56 of welcoming the disqualified. And now the third text is about the ethnically different. It's Isaiah chapter 19. The days are coming. Now that means we don't really know when, but it is certain that in the providence of God it's going to happen. On that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Iraq, and the Iraqi will come into Egypt, and the Egyptians will go into Iraq, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. So what that means is no border patrols, and it means no customs officials, just freedom of movement, because there will be peace. On that day, Israel will be the third with Egypt and Iraq, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, God says, "Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my heritage." This is an astonishing statement, because those 3 phrases, my people, the work of my hands, and my heritage, are 3 pet names for God's chosen people, and they're all used of Israel. And now this prophet has taken this catalog of pet names for Israel and has distributed them among Israel's enemies in the Near East to say that God has many chosen peoples. It's astonishing. Now, to be sure, it doesn't say that that's how it is now, but that's how it's going to be, which means that Israel in the Old Testament has to give up its mistaken notion that it is the only chosen people of God. I'm surprised that got into the text. And then I wanted to mention a final text. It's tucked away in the 9th chapter of the book of the prophet Amos, and it sits there all by itself. Amos was addressing Israelites who thought they were God's special, well-beloved, chosen people, and aren't we wonderful? It's like saying, God bless America, God bless America, God bless America. We must be the greatest nation in the history of the world. But Amos names Israel's 2 great enemies of the moment, the Philistines, the Palestinians, and the Aramaeans, the Syrians, and notes that God did an exodus for you, And for them, God does many exoduses for all kinds of people, because I am a God of emancipation, and you do not have a monopoly on it. So what I want to say is that about economic others, the Bible struggles with exploiting the vulnerable or providing a safety net for the vulnerable. Concerning ethnic others, the Bible struggles with exterminating them or imagining a community that embraces them. Concerning the religiously different, the Bible struggles with excluding them because they're dirty, or imagining all people gathered together at the festival of God. I want to tell you about a book by Martha Nussbaum at the University of Chicago. You may know that Samuel Huntington, a conservative at Yale, quite a while ago wrote a book called The Coming Clash of Civilizations, in which he predicted a great clash between Islam and the West. And that's been a very important text for a lot of people who want to foster that clash. So Martha Nussbaum has, for many years, been studying the culture of India. And she's spent a lot of time there, and she interviewed a lot of Muslim leaders and a lot of Hindu leaders about the clash between Muslims and Hindus. And her book is entitled The Clash Within, which means to answer Samuel Huntington about the coming clash, in which she says the clash in India is not between Hindus and Muslims. It's between those who can accept the other and those who want to exclude the other. Referring to the title of her book, The Clash Within, on the last page she says, that clash between excluding others and welcoming others is a clash within every one of us. And then she says, what matters is how you process it. If her insight is right, and I believe it is, that is a hugely important insight to recognize that every one of us is busy. We're busy processing that clash of wanting to welcome and wanting to exclude. Not many of us are pure types about excluding everyone who's not like us. Not many of us are pure types about welcoming everyone. But she suggests that there is a kind of a fluidity of possibility in each of us that we must continue to process and think through and redecide this. So in our quest for greater diversity at Fountain Street Church, I find it enormously helpful to see that the Bible already is a script for that clash. It's a script about how to get rid of everybody who isn't Israelite, or how to welcome people in. What matters is how you process it. I think that's the process we're all in, of discovering that people we thought were objectionable or unqualified or smelled bad or didn't speak English or whatever are welcomed by God. How you come out on that clash between wanting to welcome and wanting to exclude largely determines whether the church remains a little tribal community of people like me, or whether Fountain Street Church becomes a house of prayer for all people. We close with hymn number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath.